Let's break it down. Black has a two-pawn advantage, but the presence of opposite-colored bishops suggested that the most likely outcome would be a quick draw. And that was exactly what Nigel Short and Vishy Anand, who were commentating on the game, had concluded. After analyzing for a while, we agreed there was no way to win. But then the unthinkable happens. Alexei Shirov, playing with the black pieces, raises his hand and stuns everyone with bishop h3, a move that defies all logic. For many, this is the most surprising and incredible move in the entire history of chess. Nowadays, engines are incredibly powerful, but for a long time, even they struggled to find this move. And if you want to understand the concept behind this move, the answer is in this video. To fully grasp the idea behind Shirov's move, we first need to understand an important concept. For example, let's look at this endgame, where white has 3 pawns against a bishop. Obviously, white is the only one with winning chances. However, this position is a draw because of the crucial principle of everything on a single diagonal. From this position, the bishop can simultaneously control the advance of all white's pawns, as none of them can move forward without being captured. If the white king moves to b4, trying to support his pawns to push them forward, the black king arrives just in time at d6 to stop it. Likewise, if the white king moves to a5 aiming for b6, the black king reaches c7 and stops it again. And this will repeat over and over. There is simply no way to make progress. As we mentioned before, the bishop and king will defend this single diagonal perfectly. This important concept in bishop versus pawn endgames also applies to opposite-colored bishop endgames. For example, let's give white an extra bishop and place it on d5. Even with a 3-pawn advantage, this position is still completely drawn because the bishop, being on the opposite color, has no influence whatsoever on the blockade happening on the dark squares. For instance, we already know that white cannot make progress along this diagonal. In this case, the king might try to maneuver toward d3, looking for a way to sneak in from the right side of the board. But as soon as the king reaches e2, attempting to infiltrate through this route, black's king simply steps to f4, shutting the door once again. If the white king keeps trying by moving to f1, this time attempting to break through along this diagonal, the black king simply steps to g3, blocking the path once again. There is no way through. If the white king tries to go back, the black king mirrors its move, maintaining the blockade. This means the position is dead drawn. If we ask Stockfish, it confirms the evaluation, showing only a tiny symbolic advantage for white. But now, let's make a small change. Let's remove the bishop and move the pawn from c4 to f3. Now, everything has changed drastically. This endgame is completely lost for black, due to the fact that the game is no longer confined to this diagonal, because the advance of this pawn also needs to be addressed. No matter who moves, the position is easily winning. For example, white plays king to c4, black wastes a tempo with bishop a7, and now f4 is played, securing the win. If black's king captures the pawn, whether now or later, it will eventually have to take it. And once that happens, the white king enters d5, reaching the critical squares c6 and b7, which leads to an easy win in the endgame. If we ask Stockfish, it confirms the evaluation. This position is completely won for white. Therefore, we can conclude that in bishop versus pawns endgames, or even opposite-colored bishop endgames, the everything on a single diagonal concept is often more important than material itself. Now, let's take this idea and apply it to Shirov's game. First, as we mentioned earlier, black has a two-pawn advantage, and they are strong passed pawns, but there are opposite-colored bishops on the board. Let's try to win this position by playing normally. For example, let's go for what seems like the most natural move in the world, bishop e4. White continues with pawn to g3. Now, to move this pawn out of the bishop's attack, we push it to f5. White's king moves to f2, while black's king, needing to support the passed pawn's advance, aims to reach c5, so it moves to d6. Now, the king reaches the critical square e3, and black's king gets to c5 as planned. But if we take a closer look, the bishop, from this single diagonal, is completely stopping both the pawn advance and the promotion of the other pawn. Because of this, white can even afford to waste a tempo. The black king tries to enter the queen side, and white can afford to waste another tempo without any risk. Black plays king b3, aiming to enter c2, then move to b1 and support the promotion of the pawn. But white responds with king d2, shutting the door completely. Black then tries to enter from a2, but once again, white blocks the path with king c1. There is simply no way through. If the king goes back, white's king mirrors its moves, and there is no way to make progress. The same mechanism we saw earlier applies here once again. If we ask Stockfish, it confirms that despite the two-pawn advantage, this endgame is a draw. The reason? The everything on a single diagonal principle holds perfectly. Let's go back to the main position and try something different. This time, let's go for a more creative attacking approach. This time, we go for a direct approach, playing king d6, willingly sacrificing the f6 pawn. But as we have learned, capturing material is not the priority. Instead, white plays king f2, ensuring that when black's king reaches c5, white can immediately respond with the critical move king e3. This completely stops the advance of the d pawn, while still maintaining the entire defensive setup along a single diagonal. Once again, this position is completely drawn. There is no way to break this fortress on the dark squares, just as we saw in the previous examples. Now let's return to the starting position, and suddenly, Shirov's move, bishop h3, becomes much easier to understand. 2 exclamation marks for this move. Although this move required incredible precision and calculation, Shirov had a clear understanding of the concept and knew exactly what needed to be done to win the endgame. The idea behind this move is that black's king will quickly reach e4, push the d-pawn forward to d4, and break white's defensive setup on the diagonal, without giving the king time to stop it, as we will see next. For example, Topalov, after witnessing this stunning move, naturally captured the bishop. But to deepen our understanding, let's explore what would have happened if he had not captured and instead played king f2. In this case, black's king advances to f5. If it reaches e4, the game is completely winning, so white tries to stop it with king f3. But after this, black plays bishop takes g2, check. If white captures the bishop, the king reaches e4, and as we already know, this position is winning. If white avoids capturing the bishop and instead plays king e3 to block king e4, the position is still lost, because now the f-pawn has become a passed pawn as well. And although the king and bishop can temporarily hold back both pawns using the single diagonal defense we studied earlier, at some point, the f-pawn will push forward, breaking the fortress. Exactly like we saw in the introductory example. So, Topalov is not going to leave this astonishing move unanswered. Of course, he captures the bishop. After this, Shirov continues with king f5. White plays king f2, but black's king reaches e4, and now there is no way to stop the d-pawn from advancing to d4 on the next move. Seeing this, Topalov at least decides to capture the f6 pawn. But as we mentioned earlier, the d pawn pushes forward to d4, and white is now completely lost. Why? Because the single diagonal defense has been shattered. White might still manage to block the d pawn on one diagonal, but there is no way to control both diagonals at the same time, which means the a pawn will eventually break and decide the game. For example, black is now threatening to push the a pawn to a3, after which there would be no way to stop it. This forces white to play bishop e7 to prevent it. Now, if the king were on e2, directly opposing black's king and preventing it from entering, the game would likely be a draw. But white is one tempo behind, and as Tartakower famously said, chess is the tragedy of a single tempo. Black's king now enters d3, with the simple plan of reaching c2 and supporting the pawn's promotion. To try to prevent this, the bishop threatens the pawn on c5, but the king moves to c4, countering the attack. Since white's bishop must stay on this diagonal, it moves back to e7. Now, black's king moves to b3, with the simple idea of reaching c2 once again. White's bishop attacks the c5 pawn again, but this time, black pushes the d pawn to d3, threatening to continue with d2. The bishop must stay on this diagonal, so the only way to stop it is with the king, either from e1 or e3, but it does not matter, because in both cases the king reaches c2. After this, there is no way to stop d2, so white's bishop must move to b4. But now, the other pawn pushes forward, a3. And this is the key concept of the video. The bishop cannot control both diagonals at the same time. White has no choice but to play bishop takes a3, but now black simply plays d2, and there is nothing white can do to stop the pawn from queening. This is why Topalov decided to resign. Hope you enjoyed this analysis. See you in the next video.